I'll be brave if you're brave. I'll be brave, but only if you're brave. And it could be just you and me. We'll be family. Just wait and see. So I will fight if you'll fight. Yeah, I will fight, but only if you'll fight. Oh, we can make it through this like sailors in a tempest. Like sailors in a tempest together. And it could be just you and me. We'll be family. Just wait and see.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Lung Cancer Living Room. Welcome, everyone in the room, all of those signing in online from near and far away. We're so happy to have you here tonight. As you know, tonight's conversation is going to be, it's pretty exciting. I don't think we've ever done a living room like this before, if you can believe that. But we're going to be talking about some diagnostics and why that's relevant to everyone in the room and everyone watching. And then we're going to be talking about multimodality treatment. And for those who may not know what that means, Drs. Daly and Dr. Reiss, who will join us shortly, are going to talk a little bit about that. In particular, what role radiation may or may not play in your therapy. So we're really excited to have this conversation tonight. And on that note, I know that Drs. Daly and Reiss don't need any introductions in this room, but around the country they may. So I'm going to ask that they both take turns, just introduce yourselves, say who you are and what you do, and then we'll jump into tonight's topic. So Jonathan, you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you again for inviting me. It's always nice to come down here.
Well, you're family too.
And talk. Well, thank you.
You both are.
I'm a medical oncologist at UC Davis who primarily takes care of lung cancer patients, and I also focus on doing research and trying to come up with new effective targeted therapy and immunotherapy combinations to try to overcome resistance to existing treatments.
Right.
And I'm Megan Daly. Thank everybody again so much for the invitation to come. Jonathan and I are so excited to do this together. I think it's been 5 or 6 years since I've been down here, so it's really special to be back. I'm a radiation oncologist at UC Davis. I primarily focus on lung cancer, and my research focuses on a few areas. I'm very interested in ways of combining radiation with some of the really amazing new drugs that are coming out to try and synergize and make the radiation more effective and the drugs more effective. And I'm also very interested in ways of making radiation have fewer side effects and be less toxic when we're using it in the chest.
Which is awesome.
Thank you. And they didn't really say nearly enough about themselves because they're really doing amazing work, absolutely amazing work. And we're starting to see chronically managed lung cancer. We had a patient, a stage 4 patient, just last week that had surgery that was stage 4, and they finally lopped out a lobe, and after all the treatment she's been on over a long period of time, you know, at the moment she's cancer-free. Yeah, so all good news.
Yeah.
But they're amazing, rock stars.
Yeah, they really are. So with that, we're going to jump in. We're going to talk about diagnostics and multimodality treatment. The diagnostic part, we won't jump too much into what's available now insofar as we're going to talk about sort of in the follow-up space, right? So you guys all know CTs and PETs. We've talked, a bunch of people talked about them. We're going to talk a little bit about what's happening with the Explorer, and then Megan and I were talking about this right before about new tracers under development. So I don't know who wants to take the lead on this. If you want to talk about maybe Explorer first, what it is and why it's important, and then go into the tracer? Sure. Okay.
Sure, that sounds great.
Okay.
Dr. Daly, Megan can go into more detail,
Yeah.
but as our lung cancer radiation oncology expert, but the Explorer PET is essentially a total body PET developed mainly at UC Davis that is more sensitive than most standard PETs in terms of detecting metabolic activity and potential cancer lesions. And so, we've deployed that now and are now using that both in patients and in clinical trials. And it also could be potentially faster with lower doses of radiation depending on the situation, so they could hopefully perform scans more quickly. And so we've been looking at these both in patients as part of standard of care and also in clinical trials with some of these novel radio tracers that Megan can talk more about.
And I think we had a question before.
Oh, yeah.
Rick, don't forget your mic.
So, quick question. That PET, will it work in the brain, or is it like a typical PET that will not, because the metabolic rate is high anyway?
That's a great question. So I'm going to defer that to Megan to answer.
So the short answer is not really. So the problem isn't the PET scanner. The problem is the tracer you're using, because the brain uses a huge amount of glucose. So when you're using FDG, which is fluorodeoxyglucose, it's taken up not only by cancer, but it's taken up by your brain, because your brain is using lots of glucose. And in a second, I'm going to use that as a segue into talking about some of the other stuff we have going on. But I think just to add on a couple of things to what Jonathan was saying about the Explorer, a few of the things that are really cool about the Explorer, and I think will eventually really make it a bit of a game changer. Because of the sensitivity, it is vastly lower radiation exposure, which does eventually open up the possibility of being able to safely do PETs much more frequently. It also allows us to, I'm sure many of you have, if not most of you have had a PET scan done. Typically, you get an injection of a tracer, you sit in a dark room for an hour, and then you get scanned. With the Explorer, because it's so sensitive, you actually can scan the patient the next day, potentially. And that, because it's so sensitive, there's still a little bit of radiation being emitted. And that actually, in some cases, may let us differentiate between things, cancer and other things that tend to give us false positives on PET scans. So it opens up a lot of interesting possibilities. Coming back to the question about the brain, so FDG doesn't work. There are some other tracers that are very interesting. Tracer meaning thing you get injected before the PET scan. There's a couple that I'm familiar with that are in tests at UC Davis. I know centers around the country, Stanford, UCSF, they're also looking at lots of PET tracers. For example, one of my colleagues, Julie Sutcliffe, in our nuclear medicine department, has developed a tracer to something called beta-6 integrin. And I've seen some of the images, and it actually works very nicely on brain mets, because the brain doesn't take up this tracer at all. So you see perfect images of brain mets in some patients. So it's still completely experimental. It's not ready for prime time yet, but eventually some of these tracers may help. It'd be really amazing if instead of having to do a brain MRI and a PET scan, you could just do one tracer, especially one where you don't have to fast, and you get an image of the whole body plus of the brain. There's other tracers that might specifically be really great for following a particular drug. So there's one that we're just starting to look at UC Davis, also at UCSF, that specifically looks to response to immunotherapy. So it looks at T cells, and hopefully we're hoping it'll give us an idea of whether immunotherapy is working very early. So if it isn't, we can switch quickly and we don't have to wait for somebody to progress.
So how far out do you think that is for practical use?
So both of the tracers I mentioned are in clinical trials right now. To be used broadly, they'd need to have FDA approval, so that realistically probably at least a few years.
Can anyone join the trial?
Absolutely.
Fairly quickly?
We have slots on both.
I would be interested in that, because the only activity that I have, or only progression I have, is in the brain, and they can't get a biopsy of it, and you can't really see what's going on. I mean, it's problematic.
We do have slots on both of those trials I mentioned.
And I would also highlight, in terms of clinical trials and some of these novel radio tracers, there's a trial that's sponsored by the National Cancer Institute that we hope to have opened over the next month or so, and that's looking at combining two drugs that target metabolic pathways in squamous lung cancer, as well as KRAS lung cancer with specific co-mutations where we think they're susceptible to certain inhibitors of different metabolic pathways, specifically glycolysis and glutaminolysis. And those are being combined, and we're actually looking at a novel radiotracer called doing glutamine PETs to look at this alternative metabolic pathway that may mediate resistance to one drug targeting glycolysis. So by combining them both, we hope to have synergistic activity and actually image that activity in patients on a clinical trial where there's really promising both clinical and early data showing that combining these two drugs to target metabolic pathways in certain mutations in squamous and KRAS lung cancer could have preferential activity. And it was actually partly developed by Go2 Lung Cancer Foundation Research, and it's a trial that's going to be open at UC Davis as well as Memorial Sloan Kettering that was developed with David Shackelford, who was funded by the Go2 Foundation, as well as myself and Paul Pack and Mark Dunphy at Memorial Sloan Kettering, who've really done a lot of work both with the glutamine PET and looking at this combination. So it was really excited. And actually, one of the ways I got connected through David Shackelford at UCLA was through a patient who was very involved with the Go2 Lung Cancer Foundation. So that's actually research that in a sense has been springboarded by patients and by the Go2 Lung Cancer Foundation.
And
so
we love to
we're
see
really excited
the younger,
about that.
innovative, more robust thinking people working together. And they come up with some amazing things.
And at UC Davis, it'll be done on the Explorer.
Yeah,
So, so that'll be really
That's great.
exciting.
Great.
So that'll hopefully be open in the next month or two.
But I think, and one of the things I just want to touch on to Jonathan's point, and then we'll keep moving, is some of that seed money or seed funding, if you will, that is all, that kind of stuff happens because of you guys and others and your support that we were able to fund this type of research that then, to Jonathan's point, springboards into this other bigger, sort of more exciting stuff. And,
Right.
And
a much bigger grant, that allows even more research and to get to the end of the line.
Yeah, so this
and
is-
actually bring something to the table.
Yeah, so it's a big thank you to
Yeah.
all of you,
Right.
because we couldn't do it without your support.
Thank you. Now, I was just curious, my son has, I better say it, edema cell ALK mutation, stage 3A, and he's had the surgery. And actually, my daughter's texted me here. Is there, he didn't know, he was in a trial maybe with Keytruda, we'll never know. Would a blind trial. Is there anything new out there for ALK mutation, what he has?
So that's a great question. There's been a lot of research in ALK-positive lung cancer, and so we've got some great initial drugs that are approved. Some of them we've heard the names. Today there's alectinib and brigatinib. Alectinib was compared to an earlier generation, crizotinib, which was the first generation ALK inhibitor, and showed almost 3 years that go by on average, before the cancer starts progressing with high response rates and high amounts of tumor shrinkage. There's other ALK inhibitors like lorlatinib that were recently approved once drugs such as alectinib stop working. And there's other ALK-specific inhibitors that are in clinical trials that look to be particularly promising. Oftentimes, us as lung cancer doctors, when one of those drugs stops working, we try to find out why that happened in terms of what are the mutations that cause the cancer to outwit these drugs, and then try to match it to the best treatment, because some work better against some mutations and some pathways of resistance in others. So that's the main kind of broad overview of how we think about treating ALK-positive lung cancer. But there are a lot of exciting ALK inhibitors that are out there and that are being developed.
Dr. Reiss, can I just piggyback on that? You may have seen, we just announced a collaborative research grant with Dr. Christine Lovely at Vanderbilt and Dr. Trevor Bavona here at UCSF, where they're looking at novel drug combinations that can try to delay or prevent resistance to ALK drugs altogether. As Dr. Bavona says, we want to rather than interrogating the black box after the plane crashes, we want to keep the plane from going down in the first place. That's kind of the metaphor that we're working with. And then through the Daly Lung Cancer Medical Institute, we also have a study called Spacewalk that's looking at mechanisms of ALK resistance. So this is a rich area of research. We're invested on multiple fronts in the ALK space, so yeah.
And I would in addition to what Amy was saying, we do have trials both at UC Davis and UCSF, some of which we share and open together, looking based on Trevor Bavona's research, looking at combining a pathway called the MEK inhibitor with an ALK inhibitor, and looking at that in ALK patients that have, especially ones that have mechanisms of resistance that may bypass around ALK. So that's another avenue of research.
Stage 3 ALK?
Oh, so, these inhibitors have mainly, that's a great question. These inhibitors have mainly been studied in metastatic lung cancer, so not stage 3, but stage 4 lung cancer. There's no specific immunotherapy drug for ALK lung cancer. In fact, we have some sense that in many lung cancers that aren't related, like ALK, for example, and EGFR tend to not occur in patients who have a big smoking history, often occur in patients who've never smoked, and so is essentially not related to smoking. And we get a sense that in those EGFR and ALK, looking at clinical trials, that at least existing PD-1 antibodies don't seem to work as well in those patients that don't have many mutations that are more associated with smoking that can help trigger antigens that stimulate the immune response.
All of the information I've received on ALK and immunotherapy is immunotherapy doesn't work on ALK. It works on many things, but doesn't work on ALK. Would you agree?
Yeah, so,
Or EGFR.
Immunotherapy, these PD-1 drugs in and of themselves, the response rates are extremely, extremely low, if anything. So, we're looking for ways, combinations and how best to combine them and get new treatments in terms of activating immune response in those cancers.
I think I have something very similar. I had a question about talking with my general oncologist. At stage 4, I had a large, of course I have it's metastases to my adrenal gland and my lymph nodes, but there's this big tumor in my lung. Why not just zap it? And she's like, well, the medication will reduce it. And I'm like, well, why not reduce it and then do the medication? Again, she explained it in layman's terms, but it just didn't resonate, so I couldn't really understand if it's in the adrenal gland and some lymph nodes. I guess I don't know what happens if you radiate a lymph node, what happens, and would it be beneficial to reduce the tumor size before you do the chemotherapy? But the other question I had, that was one, based on what a couple people said here. And then the other one is, I didn't know you could re-radiate an area. So with the femur, it seems to be that for lung cancer patients, one of the most common things to happen is the bone mets in the femur. And I've already had radiation, and there's a lot of sclerosis. Mm-hmm. So how can you see if there is an active tumor within the sclerosis area that they didn't quite catch everything?
It would probably pop up in a PET scan.
It will pop up in a PET scan?
You would be able to see it on a PET scan, probably not a CT.
And can they radiate the area that has a lot of sclerosis around it? And does everybody know this?
I mean,
community doctors, community oncologists versus academics.
There was an RTOG, which is what the NRG used to be. It's a big cooperative group, and quite a while ago at this point, probably close to 10 years ago, they did a trial looking at repeat radiation for bone mets. And I mean, even at the time, we all thought it was a fairly simple trial, but it is generally safe. You sometimes use a little bit of a different dose and schedule, but where it becomes very tricky is if you're treating in the spine. So somebody's already had full dose radiation over their spine and they have a new spine met that looks threatening. That can be pretty complicated because you're right next to the spinal cord. You have to be super careful. With the femur, it's actually pretty straightforward.
And that would help reduce pain.
Yeah, if something came back in the same spot in the femur, so, I mean, the femur, one of the main reasons we tend to jump on that quickly is it can predispose people to fractures because it's just a bone that we use so much, and so it's weight-bearing. So unlike a lot of bones in the body, even if a femur a femur met is totally asymptomatic, I usually treat it to try and prevent it from causing symptoms, whereas if somebody has a totally asymptomatic small met in their scapula, a lot of times we would say, just get systemic therapy and watch it.
Yeah, I had the radiation, and it was such a breeze. And he said, "Oh, and when you're done with this, you will be able to walk. You won't need your crutches anymore." And I told him later, I'm like, "Yeah, set the bar low." The pain never really went away, and so they found a new lesion. So I guess for a patient, maybe my new oncologist, or maybe I misunderstood my radonc doctor. It could be that I just misunderstood. And then my first question, why not just reduce a large tumor and then concurrently do the for stage 4?
I mean, so based on our current understanding, I don't want to make radiation sound like it is the cure for everything, and I'm not trying to give that impression. We wouldn't usually say, well, we're going to try and radiate the biggest tumor and we're not going to radiate the other tumors. Usually when we are doing this approach of trying to radiate limited metastases, we only do it in a setting where we can actually radiate all of them. So if we can't do that, usually we would start with a drug therapy and go from there. And it doesn't mean we wouldn't consider radiating something in the future if it's the only site left or the only site growing, but we wouldn't say, well, this is the biggest tumor, we're going to radiate this, but we're going to leave the other spots growing. Right now, none of the studies we have suggest that's beneficial.
I think our biggest, our concern about radiating is depending on the situation, in a sense that if there's multiple spots out there, you wouldn't necessarily go after the largest spot with the other spots out there. Looking at it as almost like, a weed you pull up. You pull up the weed, but there's still seeds and things still there. So unless somebody was having symptoms, then, oftentimes to help relieve those symptoms is the primary goal, we initiate radiation. Now, I think getting to your point, well, why not just radiate everything? And, what we worry in that situation, without establishing some type of control, like the situation we talked about before, where somebody's on a targeted treatment for a year or two, and there's just a few, spots out there. You worry, you spend all that time finishing radiation, and then you get another scan, and lo and behold, there's a bunch of other spots, and you're playing catch up. So, in some of those situations, that's our main concern. We feel in some situations may not be as helpful, and then in other situations, like we outlined before, could be potentially helpful. And like I said, a lot of times there's a gray area, and that's where we have our multimodality, just multidisciplinary discussions.
And there are potential side effects to radiation, and those risks increase the larger the number of spots you're treating. So not that there's a hard and fast limit on exactly the number of spots you can safely treat, but eventually you're just going to have too many side effects.
What's the next big thing happening?
Well, I think you got at something in the, before you mentioned, if you look at kind of the evolution of how we take care of cancer, it's having drugs that act together that are synergistic, that, have a multiplicative effect, where the toxicity is manageable and not overlapping, and so how they developed, how they cured testicular cancer, how they cured lymphoma, even if it's metastatic widely, is taking that principle and then bringing it up front to prevent any resistance from the cat getting out of the bag. So I think the future of lung cancer care, at least for metastatic cancer, is to find these targeted therapy drugs, these immunotherapy drugs, and, how best to combine them that overcomes this resistance, and not to do it after the fact, but to bring it up front. Yep. And then from there, potentially monitoring through plasma, although the sensitivity may not be there yet for low bulk disease and so forth for resistance to develop, and if you detect something, potentially add another drug.
Right.
Not unlike potentially, not unlike in a sense how they came up with combination therapy for HIV or for other cancers like testicular cancer and so forth.
Yeah, hit it hard.
Yeah.
Don't wait.
Oh, I'll be brave if you're brave. I'll be brave, but only if you're brave. And it could be just you and me. We'll be family. Just wait and see. So I will fight if you'll fight. Yeah, I will fight, but only if you'll fight. Oh, we can make it through this like sailors in a tempest. Like sailors in a tempest together. And it could be just you and me. We'll be family. Just wait and see.